All right, are you ready? Okay, let's get on the record. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. A couple things, well, one thing that I want to make sure isn't where the state's heading. There was an article that I think misconstrued the nature of Mr. Crane's testimony, but if I misunderstood his testimony, I want to hear it from the state because it's not consistent with my understanding of how events unfolded that led to Mr. Mciver turning himself in. This doesn't have anything to do with the jury, but I did not understand the state to be suggesting, arguing, or intimating in any way that Judge Schwall somehow tipped Mr. Mciver off through the phone call that Mr. Crane described happening at Roasters to say, hey, this just in. My understanding, independent of Mr. Crane's testimony, was that there were efforts underway to connect with Mr. Mciver and or his attorneys to create a smooth, non-spectacle-like process of connecting Mr. Mciver with APD once those warrants had been sworn out. Did I misunderstand what Mr. Crane said, or what the state's angle is on this? Because if you think it was what we're reading in the media, you ought to talk with Van Packer so that you aren't sharing something with the jury that's inaccurate.
I understand. I haven't seen the media report, and good morning, by the way.
Good morning.
I haven't seen the media report, so I'm kind of...
Which is fine with me, that's okay. I don't know, but it got thrust in my face by someone.
Okay.
And I said, gosh, that's not consistent with what I understood the testimony to be.
Right.
More importantly, testimony or otherwise, because I don't think Crane said specifically there was something good, bad, or odd about the phone call. Hey, Judge Schwall knows Mr. Mciver and vice versa. My understanding of the history of how things play out is nothing the jury needs to worry about, unless it's going to be something you're going to be arguing, is that APD was in the midst of trying to contact Mr. Mciver so that there wasn't a big spectacle in relation to the arrest. I may be mistaken about that, but the info I have is that that phone call wasn't anything sinister.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that.
Okay. Good. Anything we need to work through from the state before we get going?
Yes, a couple things. I expect that this morning the state will call the medical examiner, Dr. Henniger, and in my meeting with him last week, he identified 5 photographs out of perhaps 50 or 60 that he thought would be relevant for his testimony. I've shared them with the defense. I understand that there's an objection to 2 of them, and if it's okay with the court, probably the easiest way would be for me just to show them to you.
Yeah, show me all 5,
Okay.
and then we can talk about the 2 that are at issue.
Okay.
And these are numbered.
Oh, you know what, Judge? I don't think the alcohol numbered. I apologize.
That's okay. We've got 334, 335, and so I've got 6 photos. 2 of them aren't numbered. Okay, those to you.
I'm sorry, I miscounted.
That's okay.
6.
It is 6.
Yes.
And do you know, so I'm getting into the record correctly, if this is 334 or 339? I can't tell if the last digit is a 4 or a 9.
4.
Okay.
Yes.
The critical also. I put it on a diet last night. We don't need these. Come on. Those are both in. Right. Those are at the hospital.
Yes. Right.
Okay. All right. Let's get organized on this. What are I have in front of me 6 photos that are clearly from the autopsy 1987. They've got the secession number on all of the photos. What are the 2 to which you have an objection?
Well, I think there is one with a facial identification number. The only difference, well, this is already in, so I guess I have no objection to that one.
Okay, that's 335.
That shows the medical examiner's number. So,
Right.
and it
Usually
doesn't
how they start.
have the medical intervention. 325, I don't see what that adds
Okay.
to the equation at all. Since we already are going to get the medical examiner's number from the first photograph, the facial photograph.
Okay.
So I would object to 325. I object to 328 because I think essentially 261 covers 328. Now, 334, I think, perhaps shows the entrance wound a little bit better in here, given the broad state of it'll help my testimony. That's likely to come in regardless of objection. So basically, 328 and 325 are my 2 objections.
Okay. I have a question, and then I'll hear from you.
Can I just check and see which one is
Sure.
handed out?
Turn all these around.
Okay, let me then add 600.
600.
Yes,
Okay.
because I think 601 shows the exit wound and allows the medical examiner to testify regarding that and its location. And I understand this is locational, but he can testify to location. It doesn't show the top of the head. The measurements are always from, as you know, the top of the head to this particular portion. So there's no difference between showing the close-up on 601. There is no additional value to 600. So.
Okay. A couple questions, Mr. Rucker. On 600 and 601, it looks like something's been blurred out. Was that something that the ME's office does, or your team has done that so that it's less graphic,
That's correct.
stitching that's done to reassemble the body
That's
after
absolutely
the
correct.
life-saving measures?
Yes, I did it in an attempt to have it be less gruesome in its nature. And these photos were sent to the defense in its altered state last weekend so that they could have an idea that we were going to try to blur that part out. I didn't think it was relevant. And so, but
And then on 600, there's also a Post-it note that'll stay on.
that will stay on.
Okay. So then here's my question. Get another question. As between 328 and 334, what does 328 provide? I'll hand these to you. We actually got them right there in front of you. You just stay right there. Somehow we both have a set. Those are the only 2 I'm wrestling with. And I think 334 comes in. The question is, what does 328 add that you wouldn't get from what's already in? I think Mr. Harvey may be walking away with it now. But,
No, 261.
yeah, 261.
I was going to make sure I didn't take it, so I was going to leave it here.
Yeah.
These are my copies. I want to make sure that the evidence stays with you.
Good choice. And I'll make sure you get your copies back, but it's helpful to have the discussion right there with those there. So 328 seems a little cumulative to 261, given the nature of the photos we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I feel like 334 is a photo taken far enough back that it still allows the jurors to orient themselves where on Ms. McIver's back was the entrance wound. Distinct from 601, I'm disagreeing with Mr. Harvey, and I'll get it on the record in a minute, but 601 is such a close-up of the exit wound that I don't think it provides a perspective. But 334, coupled with the one in your hand, I think gives 261, gives the jury, I think, a sufficient perspective, and would enable Dr. Henninger to say, hey, based on this and that. The one thing I want to avoid is Dr. Henninger saying, wait a minute, I really can't talk to you about 261. I've never seen it. I didn't take it. I can't vouch for, not that the wound would move or anything, but that.
And it's not taken from the perspective of a forensic pathologist. He directs the tech to actually position the body in such a way that will allow him to testify consistent with his findings. And that's 328 is what I'm referring to.
Sure.
You just kind of look at 261, you can kind of tell it's really not designed to really enable a person to get a full perspective about the width of her back and where exactly, from a perspective of where the entrance is, you know, to how far down it is from her head, which is going to become particularly relevant in my examination with Dr. Henniger.
So then, taking that, how does 334 not give you that info?
Because, I guess he could say he measured from the top of the head, but you don't get a chance to see it in the photograph. And so that was the rationale. 334 is different because the close-up then allows him to say, by looking at this photo, I can tell you this is the entrance. Mm-hmm. And
334 is coming in.
Okay.
The question is, do we need 328 as well? And I'm hearing you that 261 is a poor substitute for 328. The question then is, assuming it's not a substitute, what does 328 add? You've helped me understand it, because it's an even wider perspective. The jury can see, well, there's the top of Ms. McIver's head. But my concern, and I'm contrasting 334 with 601. 334 is what you're going to use as your close-up, I'm putting that in quotes, of the entrance wound. 601 is your close-up of the exit wound. 601 is really hard to tell where on the human body that is. Right? I think that the doctor could orient folks, because as a standalone photo, it's not real instructive as to where on the body. And that's why I'm going to allow 600 in. 334, I think, gets you both things. Okay. You can describe the entrance wound, how it's different from an exit wound, etc. I also don't think an issue in this case is where was the entrance and where was the exit. It would be a late game surprise to have Mr. Harvey contest entrance and exit.
None of this is contested, especially as you noted, given the extensive testimony from the surgeon and all the surgical intervention that was done in the explanation. So there is no issue here.
Well, there may not be an issue, but I think I appreciate Mr. Rucker's observation that the location of entrance and exit, elevation, whatever one will call it, is pretty darn germane. And it ties in with all the work that Knox and your expert has done. So for that reason, I will, for now, exclude 328. But we'll see how the testimony goes, and it may be after cross-examination you want to renew a request to admit 328. But over objection, I'm going to allow in 600, which I believe provides a much more informative perspective as to where on Ms. McIver's anterior front portion of her body the exit wound is, and 325 I'll allow in if it's not particularly graphic, unless not particularly prejudicial, and it allows Dr. Henniger to orient the jurers to how his office received Ms. McIver's body when it arrived. Okay. So 328 for now is not coming in. If you think that ought to be revisited either during your direct or after cross, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Just for the record, we do it when it comes in.
Sure.
Now, so I don't.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Is Dr. Henniger the first witness?
No, sir.
Okay. Anything else from the state?
Just one thing I wanted to kind of flag, and I wanted to maybe have on the record, if we could get some direction from the defense. I indicated to them yesterday evening, about 7:30 or so, that my expectation would be that we would call 3 additional witnesses, and I would expect my case to wrap by lunch.
Today.
Today.
Okay.
And so I said that to them so that Don't know how long the motion for directed verdict would take, but so that in case they could get a couple of witnesses, perhaps in the afternoon, that would kind of make some sense. And so,
You also assumed on the motion to deny.
we also got some feedback back from the defense that contained some additional pretty important information. We got a series of slides that the defense intends to use with Mr. Jerry Culver. And so, you know, we had the testimony of Mr. Dean Driscoll quite a while ago. And so we got the slides last night. It was a surprise to me. And so I would ask respectfully that we don't deal with Mr. Culver today. Okay. I would like to have a chance to look at them perhaps tonight. And I think what we got back also is that there perhaps would be more to come.
More Culver slides.
Or more to come. I was unclear.
Which I just sent 5 minutes ago.
Okay.
One is for Stan Smith, who I do expect we would call today, is 4 slides.
Stan Smith is who, what will he be talking about?
He is a lawyer for the estate of Diane Dickerson.
Okay.
So you have those. I also sent you ones for Dr. Rye, but I don't expect Dr. Rye to be called today.
Dr. Rye is the sleep expert.
Yes.
Any reason why these slides are sliding across now?
Because I didn't prepare them and have a chance to review them with the witness until yesterday.
The slides would be akin to maybe what we saw from some of the state's witness, like a PowerPoint. It may not be a PowerPoint, but things that you and the witness have developed that would assist the witness in his or her presentation of whatever they're talking about.
Correct. I don't think any of them should be particularly controversial. I think they all reflect numbers that have come out with previous testimony, maybe just in a different format.
Sure.
And highlighting different things about those numbers.
Or they're consistent with something you would have disclosed for Mr. Culver, for example. If he said Mr. Mciver is worth $10 million, you may now have put that in slide format, but it's not a new and different number
Correct.
that the state wouldn't have seen before.
Correct.
It just might be presented in a way that reflects some things we've heard or haven't heard. Okay, well, your request was not keep them out, it's could I have a chance to digest all that?
Right.
That's a fair request, and I'm hearing that Mr. Culver won't testify until tomorrow.
And I haven't seen Mr. Smith's.
Well, maybe one of the 4 folks who are ably assisting you can start processing that. And it wouldn't be till after lunch anyway.
Okay.
And I'll print a copy.
Okay, but I appreciate that heads up. The further in advance you guys can get stuff, defense to the state, the better. As I know you wanted stuff as far in advance as possible from the state. Ms. Lyon emailed you all the draft jury charge as it stands now. You can print out any number of copies that you want, and we'll figure out a time to discuss that. What's your thought about witness availability this afternoon? And in scheduling, we have to stop at 12:20 today, hard stop. I have to run a meeting from 12:30 to 1:30. So you may not rest before lunch because, we'll see, I hope you do, that would be wonderful. But we don't have flexibility today to say, well, let's just finish off this witness. Okay?
So we should have enough witnesses to get through the day easy. I think we'll have. We just, and I've talked to them, they know who our witnesses are, but, you know, Annie Anderson will be here. We're trying to get 2 young nurses here. We thought it would be Wednesday morning. We just asked them to be here in the afternoon, but we have different lawyers over there. We have Stan Smith, Kenzie Dow, or names may not name, but they should get us, but they're a couple of hours total.
Okay. And we have the motion for directed verdict, which is not going to be 2 minutes.
It's not going to be.
That's what I said.
And if you want, we can start talking about jury charges. I read them this morning that you sent for a few of them. I did want to bring one thing to your attention. I believe the state is planning to call Mr. Dickerson this morning. And we had previously filed a motion, 404B, to exclude it. It was a fairly short motion. rather than interrupting the flow of testimony today, I was hoping I could renew it now and not have to, you've ruled on it. but,
Sure.
In some cases, well, actually, the most recent cases, you don't have to object again, but if there's any contingency to your ruling, I do have to object again.
Right.
Assuming you're going to let it in, I would ask that I be allowed to renew my objection now and not have to.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's renewed and noted and preserved, but I still intend to let Mr. Dickerson testify based on the preview I got from the state. If it's something different, then we all have
Understood.
to work.
Understood.
Okay?
I think that's the only thing I had.
So Mackenzie Davenport, I told the state that when I talked to him last week, he told me that he had seen some of the trial testimony. He is not someone who was on the witness list for either side. He works at Arcilla Mining with Ted Smith, who was on their witness list. So he hadn't received any instructions from either side not to be watching the testimony. So I told them what I understood he had seen, and so that we needed to do that. We have to do that.
And he's a possible today witness?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you getting prepared for the transition from the state's case today.
Now I have to bring something to your attention. I just got an email from an assistant DA from 3 minutes ago saying they have found phone records that I had subpoenaed when this trial began 17 years ago. And I cannot put them out, and I'd like to know why we're getting them now, and
Maybe they're in response to the slides you just sent.
part of it. And it may require me to add to our witness list whoever is the person on the phone.
Okay. Let's find out. Who sent the email?
Mr. Sprinkle.
Mr. Sprinkle sent the email, and the reason that Mr. Sprinkle is sending them to Mr. Samuels is because we just got them.
Okay. Whose phone records?
They are of the remaining phone records of Mr. Jeff Dickerson.
Okay.
So
So you haven't had a chance to process them either, but this just in.
that's correct.
Okay.
Well, but I sent a subpoena weeks ago. I can't remember if it was before trial.
And
or-
that's why he forwarded them to you this morning.
You subpoenaed everything, we gave you everything we had at the time, we subpoenaed those records and we just now got them. So we turned them over to defense counsel as soon as we got the records. We can't turn something over that we don't have.
But
But these were records of the Fulton County DA's office making phone calls to Mr. Dickerson, and they said there were none. Well, there was at most one. Now I'm being told, well, we found another one where someone from Mr. Paul Howard's office, the executive director, whatever her name is, executive assistant, actually initiated a phone call to Mr. Dickerson on January 4th. And I need to know about that, and I may need her as a witness, I may need Paul Howard as a witness, as I told them last night.
right.
I just need to know more details, and why that phone record wouldn't have existed a month. The Fulton County DA's own phone record. Why does that take a month?
Well, okay, but let's get clear as to what was provided.
And I can explain.
Please.
Fulton County District Attorney's Office, we have a lot of phone numbers. So this was an additional, we ran all the numbers that Mr. Howard's assistants or anybody that works for Mr. Howard's internal group inside of his office. And we turned everything over as we got it. This is something we just got. And Mr. Sprinkle analyzed it this morning as soon as he got it. And now there was one phone call. Along with that phone call is an email that's already been turned over to defense counsel about arranging a lunch, which is in his day planner. You guys have that turned over. Yes, Mr. Sprinkle turned that over. I can get it for you. But
Again,
right,
maybe.
which has been the theme of this trial. But
Okay.
but that's the explanation of why it's just not been turned over. It's not like the state was holding on to it so we could say, gotcha. You know, we have one phone call from January of 2018.
What's the, you keep saying you've sent a subpoena to whom? To a phone company, to the
No,
DA's
that
office?
was the DA's
Okay.
office.
All right.
For all phone records of all contacts between Mr. Dickerson and anybody in the DA's office, including Paul Howard.
Okay, so it was an expansive but appropriately targeted subpoena. I just wasn't sure if you're saying the subpoena was to the phone company or to the DA's
I
office.
think it was returnable to our 404B hearing pre-trial. That's what it was.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
And it's coming back to me now that Clint Rucker said, just serve me, that's fine. I didn't have to, find Paul Howard search went by email. And then when we had our last pre-trial conference, they returned the subpoena and whatever it was not an email, but now I'm getting an email from Mr. Sprinkle that, in about 10 minutes when the witness takes the stand, I can't even open it. Well, I don't know what it is, I don't know what, it's 10 attachments to it.
So why don't we have someone other than Mr. Dickerson be the next witness, so that Mr. Samuel at least has a chance to look at these things and handle it that way. I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm taking you at your word that if you just got it and you handed it over, then
I don't believe the state, we're not going to be using it. It was something that he turned over, and literally the explanation is in.
well, whether you're going to use it or not isn't necessarily the touchstone. It would be Mr. Samuel having an ability to look at it because he might want to use it. Mr. Dickerson, you just said you never talked to anyone in January of 2018. How do you explain this?
And who's calling who is important. Mr. Howard's reaching out to him, as opposed to what our understanding was the other way around.
So, my only request is that whatever was sent to Mr. Samuel be accessible to him, and what I'm hearing him say is he's clicking on it and it won't open. I don't know that means he's technologically challenged or it's not openable. But we've been able to cross these bridges before when folks get together. So you have how many witnesses? You said you had 3 witnesses left, Mr. Rucker?
There are 2 here right now.
Okay.
I believe we have Special Agent Chad Fitzgerald here.
Okay.
Who will talk about phone records, relevant phone records, and records.
Okay. And then ultimately Dr.
And
Hammond.
also Dr. Hammond.
Okay. Can Agent Fitzgerald testify first, or what's up? Okay. So can I ask someone from the state's team to get with Mr. Samuel so you can make accessible to him whatever was emailed? And it may be as simple as clicking on it, but he's saying he can't see the stuff.
I would delight.
Great. I know Agent Fitzgerald. I've worked with Agent Fitzgerald before. My sense is to his testimony here that isn't consequential, but if you think he's someone that's going to be subject to furious impeachment, etc., I just need to disclose the fact that I worked with him for many years when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Okay. No issue from the defense. All right. Then why don't we, I bet the jury's ready.
I'm sure they are.
Okay, we'll bring the jurors in and start with Agent Fitzgerald.
All jurors are present and accounted for, Judge.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Please be seated, your state. Thanks for being on time. We were talking about a few matters that relate to the last few witnesses that the state will be presenting in its case in chief. We have addressed those, and I'm going to ask Mr. Rucker or someone on his team to call the state's next witness.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. State Call Special Agent Chad Fitzgerald.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, sir. If you will, please have a seat. Get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Chad Fitzgerald, Chad Fitzgerald.
Good morning.
Hi.
And if you would, please introduce yourself to the jurors, tell them your name again, and how you are currently employed.
I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI. Name is Chad Fitzgerald.
And what do you do for the FBI?
I'm currently assigned to the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, or CAST, which in the umbrella of the FBI is under the Violent Crimes Against Children unit.
And how long have you been with the FBI just in general?
21 years.
And what about how long in the role that you just told the jury about?
I helped start the unit, so we were kind of an ad hoc unit, but we became official approximately 10 years ago. So obviously we're working kind of as an ad hoc unit before that.
Okay. Tell the jury a little bit about the experience in training that allows you to do the job that you just explained to them?
My education background is I have a master's in electrical engineering, specializing in communication systems. I worked in the industry on satellite communications for a company prior to coming to the FBI, and then once I got in the FBI back in the late 90s, or mid-90s I should say, I was working violent crime matters, which includes bank robberies, kidnappings, fugitives, and I was utilizing kind of my background to exploit phone records and help in those cases, and that in turn led to that ad hoc kind of group of working with cell phone records and analyzing and interpreting cell phone records for investigators, training them how they can use it, and then like I mentioned, we became an official unit. As part of the certification process within our unit, it's several weeks. It takes us about 18 to 24 months to get somebody from being involved in our unit to being officially certified. We go through training with people that work in the cellular industry, as well as we meet still on a regular basis with all the major providers in the cellular industry, the Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, with both the engineers and the subpoena compliance people that pull the records. So we talk to them about their network, how their network works, what's coming in the future, little things that we've seen happening in the past. As a matter of fact, we have mandatory recertification training in about 2 weeks where we'll be meeting those people again. That happens on a yearly basis.
And the certification that you told the jurors about, is that something that you personally have yourself as well?
Yes, so I went through the original certification and then I helped train the new guys that we're bringing on to the unit.
Does your involvement or sort of expertise in this specific field include assisting and training other individuals even outside of your agency and other law enforcement agencies?
Yes, so we put on training usually once or twice a month. Somebody in the unit is somewhere training everybody from detectives from police departments through federal investigators, whether it's FBI, ATF, DEA, and we also have trained some prosecutors, and we also travel around the world and when we get requested and help train people overseas and also work on cases overseas.
And about approximately ballpark, how many cases have you been involved with where you use the analysis of cell phone records to assist in some way in an investigation?
I mean, I look at phone records all day, every day, so it's, I know our unit, we have about 62 people nationwide, and just in 2017 alone, I was looking at our numbers, and I think we looked at, if I remember off the top of my head, it's like 7,000, 5,000 to 7,000 sets of records between those 60 people. So we look at lots of data sets of phone records.
And as a result of your experience and training and reviewing all these records, have you had the opportunity to testify in court before as an expert in cell phone analysis?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, I was testifying in Texas yesterday, in Austin.
Your Honor, at this time the state's going to consider Agent Fitzgerald as an expert in historical cell phone analysis and cell site analysis.
I'll ask Mr. Harvey what he thinks about that in just a minute. Historical cell phone analysis, that's the official cell site analysis, I understand.
Yes, and I don't have any problem with if it's easier for the court and defense counsel to call it cell site analysis.
It's not difficult, it just was peculiar. It makes it sound like old flip phones that he's
Because
analyzing.
there is the review of records that exist.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, do you have any objection to having Agent Fitzgerald so qualified?
No.
Okay. Agent Fitzgerald, you are qualified for the purposes of this trial as an expert in the related fields of historical cell phone record analysis as well as cell site analysis.
Agent Fitzgerald, as a result of the cell phone records that you reviewed in this case, did you generate a report or presentation for the jurors?
I did.
All right.
Can we approach?
Sure.
All right, Agent Fitzgerald, I'm going to show you what's in marked as State's Exhibit 269, the record. Take a look at that for me. Do you recognize it?
Oh, yes.
How do you recognize 269?
That's a report that I put together for this particular case.
Okay, true and accurate copy of the report you generated from looking at the records in this case?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to tender into the record State's Exhibit 269 and request permission to publish with the witness as well.
Mr. Harvey, any objection to this being made part of the record and published for the purposes of Agent Fitzgerald's testimony?
Published, but not.
Part of the record, likely not going back to the jury. Okay. Yeah, it's in it.
It is 269.
Yes. And I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing. I plan on using it on the monitor board for the jurors, but I'm also going to project it on the screen for the court.
Great.
All right, so let's sort of begin by telling the jurors really kind of the outline of how it is that you do the analysis that we're about to tell them about.
So for every cell phone provider, just as a matter of daily business for them to operate, they have to keep a record of every subscriber that's in their network. So you can pick your provider for your cell phone. They have to maintain a record to allow them to deliver a call to you, for you to make a call, to keep your call connected. So it keeps quality control so that you can actually, so your phone can operate. And at the end of the day, it affects their bottom line. They have to keep track of how many resources you're using on their network so they can see, they don't randomly bill you. So if you have an agreement, to use whatever it is, 5 gigabyte of data or 100 minutes worth of calls, which they don't really pay attention to anymore, but whatever your agreement is, they have to have some kind of accounting of that. So they maintain a record every time you have an interaction with the network. So they're not doing it for the NSA or the FBI or for Fulton County, District Attorney's Office. They're doing it as a matter of their business, daily business and operation, anywhere in the world, so for any provider.
Okay, and I went ahead and advanced to the next couple slides because there are some phone numbers on those,
Okay.
so let's go ahead and advance. There you go. Tell the jurors how it is that we are able to, using a cell tower, which we see on that slide, actually determine where a particular handset is. How does that work?
Okay, I'm going to use this pointer.
Yeah.
So this is a picture I took of a cell tower in the metro Atlanta area. The right half of the page is just zoomed into the top part of that tower structure. So I'm just zooming into this part where the actual, and you can see that there's these triangular pieces mounted on top of that tower, and on those triangular pieces there are these vertical panels, and those are the antennas. So my phone, there's a signal coming out of that antenna. Think of it no different than just an imaginary person at the top of that tower with a spotlight, and that spotlight is pointing down towards the earth, and wherever that's lighting up the earth is where I can stand, and that's where I'm going to have that actual service. So every phone, is programmed to speak a certain language. So if you have AT&T phone, it's programmed to speak the AT&T language. If you have a T-Mobile phone, it speaks T-Mobile language. And it's looking for that language coming out of one of these antennas. So it's just looking in the air to see if that language is there so it can communicate with it. When I am communicating with it, if I dial a number and hit the green button, I'm going to, just think of a student in a classroom where the teacher is, would be the equivalent of the tower, and all the students would be the equivalent of the phones. I dial, I hit the green button. It's like raising my hand in the classroom, waiting for the teacher to call on me so that I can ask a question. When that occurs, my phone's going to ask if it can make a phone call or send a text. When those resources are granted, a record is generated. What happens to that record is what we're looking at. What happens is there's equipment, nowadays the equipment's mounted up on top of the tower, up where these antennas are, but there's also equipment at the base on some towers. That equipment is connected to a switch within the network. The switch is kind of the brains behind the operation. It's connected to thousands of towers. The switch is connected to what we call the network core, and the network core will allow me to make a call to whoever I dialed. It's going to actually make that connection. If I were receiving a call, the exact opposite would happen. It would come into the network, go out to the switch where I'm located, and a page would go out, much like the teacher calling on a student. Is Chad Fitzgerald in the room? My phone is listening. Remember, it's monitoring that signal, looking for that language. When I hear my page go out or the teacher calling on me, I'm going to raise my hand. The phone's going to raise its hand, and I'm going to get resources, and a record's going to be generated.
And the tower that we're looking at on this slide, are cell phone towers always in this traditional setup that we see here?
So typically, when they have when they get a piece of real estate, and you can see there's multiple levels of antennas on this picture. That could be one company, it could be multiple companies. They lease space off of these towers. Sometimes they purchase the property and build their own tower and don't lease to their competitors. It just depends. It's a mismatch across the United States of what occurs. Typically, they want to maximize that location, so they will divide up those antennas. Like I mentioned earlier, the spotlight's going to be pointing in certain directions. That's just to maximize that space so that they can support as many subscribers as possible. So think of it as if I had a pie and I wanted to share it with two of you, we'd cut it into 3 equal pieces. They're doing the same thing. They're pointing those spotlights into different directions. But I think to answer your question, they don't always look like this. Not all towers look like this. Some are different, and we have to utilize resources or listings, tower lists within the network to get more details about where their towers are located and the setup of that tower.
Okay. Tell the jurors what we're looking at on this next slide.
So this is just a montage of different towers I put together. So basically what I want to relay to you is, just because you see a tower, like if you're standing out on the street wondering why you can't get a signal and you see a tower right there, if that tower does not speak your phone's language, it's not your AT&T or your Sprint phone, that tower doesn't exist in your phone's world. And just because you don't see one doesn't mean there isn't one behind you, one street over, or like painted as the side of a building. So they can be disguised different ways. They're all over the place. So like I mentioned, we have to use other listings within the tower, within each cell phone provider to figure out where all the towers are located.
What about this next slide?
So every provider maintains a tower listing or a base station almanac where they have all of their resources. In other words, their towers listed for the entire United States. So we can go to those listings and we can plot out where their assets are. So on this is a part of North Georgia up by Lake Altoona, and you can see a bunch of red dots on the map. Those are signifying the towers in that particular area from that list. And I've also highlighted 3 of them with you can see each one has a unique number in the yellow box. There's a combination of numbers that is unique throughout the entire network. So in T-Mobile or Verizon, there's only going to be one tower with that unique set of numbers all across the United States. It's like, just think of it as a tower fingerprint, or it's like a snowflake. There's only one that exists within their network. Looking at the tower list, I can also determine which direction each one of those spotlights are pointing. So which direction the sectors are pointing. So as you know, we don't take our phones and go plug them into the base of the tower to make a call. We're out mobile, so those sectors are pointing in different directions depending on where that network wants to provide service, mostly where are the potential subscribers. So there's no need to point a sector out into the middle of the woods where nobody lives and nobody ever goes, or that one hunter. They don't necessarily care about providing service to that one little person. They want to know where's the bulk of the, where are the people in that area, and they will tune that sector to be pointing in a certain direction, or that spotlight to be in a certain direction. So you can see, they're slightly, this sector is kind of pointing to the northwest versus this one's due north. So depending on where people are, they tune them a little bit different, and that's why we have to rely on that tower list to determine which direction that spotlight is pointing.
All right, in the next slide, what is this an example of? What is
So this is just an example. All the providers maintain records, like I mentioned earlier. They all have the same general information. Pretty much anywhere we go in the world, we can decipher the records because they all have the same general information. They're going to tell us when the call occurred. So we get a timestamp. It's going to tell us how long that call or that text message took. It's going to tell us who's talking to who. Not necessarily, it's not going to have a name. It's going to have a phone number talking to what phone number, depending on who's the from, who's the to. So it tells us if it's outgoing or incoming, the from and to is going to switch depending on the phone numbers. And then we have kind of in the middle, we're going to have some equipment identifiers. So, you have your phone, which has a serial number called an IMEI. That's going to have a serial number associated with it. And you have a SIM card that goes in that phone. That SIM card is related to the account. So that's what's related to your phone number. So that's, once you put your SIM card in the phone, it will authenticate, and then you can start making phone calls.
this excerpt that we're looking at right here? From which set of records is this excerpt?
This is from the MacGyver, the phone associated with Claude MacGyver. So this is just kind of a capture of a subset of the data.
And the bars that we see on that screen, are those coming in the record, or is that something that we've done?
I was told to redact all the phone numbers. So
Okay.
there's going to be a lot of, you can see I have put a name instead of the phone number on the records, and you'll see that throughout the report. So I was asked to redact all the actual phone numbers, and the gray bars are all redacted information that are specific to that account, so, and the people that they're talking to.
Based on what you see just in this excerpt alone, are you able to tell what kind of a phone produced these records?
Yes, so AT&T will put under the IMEI, based on the IMEI number, they can determine what type of phone it is, and this is an Apple iPhone. I think that says 5 or 6. Kind of hard, a little difficult to tell, but kind of on the far right is that unique set of identifiers that we can take to that tower list, and we can determine not only the location where that tower is located on Earth based on the latitude and longitude, but we can also determine which direction that spotlight or that sector is pointing. And that will give us a general geographic area where this phone had to be to make the call at this particular time for that duration.
And the analysis of these sectors in the tower itself, the steps that you told the jury about, are those the steps that you took and followed when you actually looked at a set of records for this case?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. Let's tell the jurors the first sort of date that you really looked at for the set of records as it relates to the defendant, Mr. McIver.
So I was asked to look at start at September 22nd, 2016. We're not going to go through every call that this phone made, or else we'd be here for days and years probably. But starting on September 22nd, 2016, there was an outgoing call from the Claude MacGyver phone to the other person. Is it I can't remember her first name.
Diane McIver?
Diane MacGyver.
Did you, before we get into the sets of records, did you receive records to review that allowed you to kind of walk through this analysis and plot certain things about where the handsets were?
Yes.
Did you receive just Mr. McIver's records or other records as
No,
well?
I received multiple sets of records.
Okay. And did that include Diane McIver and Patricia Carter's records?
Yes. So it's all phone numbers to me, but like I said, I asked to put these names.
The call that you, have you you already told the jury the time that we see there. Is that significant of the duration of that call?
Yes, there's a 202-second outgoing call at 9:22.
Okay, and what are the blue dots that we see on the screen?
Those are the other AT&T towers in the area. So I can tell from this record, to generate this record on the Claude MacGyver phone, utilize the tower at this location. I provided emphasis, the direction that that spotlight is pointing. You can see the neighboring towers. And so the coverage area is going to be right in this area. So that phone had to be in that coverage area to generate this record at 9:22.
What's the next call?
So this is a call later on September 22nd at 1:36 p.m. It's an incoming call from a number that's associated with A. Wilcox to Claude MacGyver. It's a 382-second phone call, and it utilized this tower and this sector that's pointing north. So that tells me the phone had to be in this general geographic area. It's not mission impossible where we can say it was in this room and moved to this room, or it was on this street. We just know it's in this general geographic area, and based on the neighboring towers, we can kind of see the limit of that tower coverage, how it would be tuned.
And what is that general geographic area, just so jurors can know without, if they can't read the street signs right there?
It's going to be basically just, I believe this is Piedmont Park, so, okay. So it's just south of Piedmont Park is what it looks like.
You have an additional note, and if you kind of squeeze it back, it'll go back to you. Tell the jurors what that little notation is about.
So I also noticed in the records there were some Wi-Fi calls. So when this phone was in a Wi-Fi coverage with the Wi-Fi turned on, it carried a call across Wi-Fi. So it's not using cellular towers anymore. It's using somebody's Wi-Fi. I don't know what Wi-Fi it used. It says a Wi-Fi call. It doesn't give us any more details than that. But there were two calls, at 1246 and 1251 with the Corey Company, a number associated with the Corey Company, and there was another one at 132 just prior to this other phone using the cell towers with the same person, A. Wilcox.
And those would have been just before 1 o'clock and then a call immediately after, about 1:30, is that right?
Yeah, there are two calls right after 1:30.
Did you look at any other records from the 22nd?
Yes, just kind of continuing through the day. There's a call at 342, kind of in down by, looks like where 485 joined, just a little bit south of that. And then there was another call at 4 o'clock, a little bit further north in the Brookhaven area.
And these are calls coming in or outgoing to Diane MacGyver?
They're from the Diane MacGyver phone to the Claude MacGyver.
And what are the duration of those calls?
The first one is going to be 138 seconds. The next one's 295 seconds.
What do we see on the next call? And explain for the jurors what that pop-out picture is about.
So I was, in addition to the phone records, I was provided a few photos of different things that were of interest in this particular case. I was provided an address at where the defendant is known to visit or own, and there's a call on the 22nd at 5:32 p.m. It was an outgoing call to Diane, and I highlighted where this building is located in Buckhead, and somebody had taken a picture of the front elevation of that building.
So based on your sort of plotting or location of this particular call, you can say that the handset was active in an area consistent with the Buckhead condo.
Right, so this tower and sector would provide some coverage to that tower, to this apartment.
Okay, and does the coverage, just so the jurors understand the way you've drawn it up there, does the coverage extend outside of the blue wedge?
Yes, that's just to provide emphasis to which direction those antennas are pointing. It should not infer the actual coverage. It's just to show you which direction those antennas are pointing, or which direction that spotlight is pointing.
Did you look at any calls for Saturday, the 25th of September?
Yes, so kind of continuing on through the records, there are a series of calls in the morning of September 25th, starting at 8:43 and continuing through 12:16 p.m. They were utilizing two different towers out in the Eatonton area, and I was also provided a picture of the house at 605 P Ridge, and I've marked that on the map with a green marker.
As we move further out into a more rural area, fair to say that the frequency of towers in the area are going to be less.
Right, so kind of what I mentioned earlier is how they're going to position not only point their sectors or those spotlights where their subscribers are. They're also, as you get more densely populated with people, they have to put the towers closer together to provide that service, because they can only support a given set number of people at any split second in time. So to support more people, they got to put towers further or closer together. As you get more rural, they can start spacing the towers further apart and sending that signal a little bit further because there aren't as many people.
And all the calls that we're looking at now on Friday the 25th are calls to and from the phone associated with the defendant, is that right?
Right, so these are all related to the Claude McIver phone, and you can see there's a series of different people that were communicated with. There's W. Harvey was the name I was given with a particular number. There's an S. Watson.
Stop for a second.
Let me object to the numbers that he was given if they're not in evidence. That's a completely different thing if there are phone numbers that are associated with people that are in evidence. But boy, this number is associated, for example, with some other person. I would object to that, because that would be hearsay and it's not in evidence.
Okay.
That's no problem, I can move on. The issue is that there's a lot of work done before with redactions, but I can move on to the next slide.
Okay, well, let's not draw attention to numbers associated with folks that we haven't put into evidence.
Sure. Yes. Agent Fitzgerald, for the next slide, did you look at a call later in the evening on Saturday, the 25th?
Yes, so kind of continuing on the 25th.
Sunday.
At 7:47 p.m., there's an outgoing call from the McIver phone utilizing a tower. I believe this is the Grange area along 20. I'm not, the other side, Conyers area along 20, using a tower and sector kind of pointing to the southeast. And I was also provided information about the Longhorn Steakhouse and a copy of I guess the credit card transaction, which occurred at 8:19. So a little bit after that phone call was made.
And the call and where you're finding that handset is consistent with the restaurant there within consistent coverage area? Same.
Yes, so this tower sector would provide coverage to the Longhorn Steakhouse.
And how long was that call that you highlighted for the jury?
That call was 45 seconds.
And it's an outgoing call from the defendant's phone?
Yes.
After the call that we just told the jurors about, are there any other outgoing calls on Sunday, September 25th from the defendant's phone?
No. The next call is at 10:47.
Based on what you reviewed in these
Or
records, okay. Based on what you reviewed in these records from that weekend and specifically this day, Sunday the 25th, did the phone appear to be working, making and receiving calls?
Yes, I mean, it's obviously there are plenty of calls on that day.
Throughout your analysis and your review of this set of records, the defendants, did you see any outgoing calls or attempts to 911?
No, not anywhere in the entire set of records.
On 9/25, the first call after the sort of Longhorns call we saw with Mr. Corey, what is the first outgoing call that the cell phone makes?
It's roughly a 2-minute call at 10:47. It's an outgoing call from Claude McIver to name S. Maples.
And how long is that call?
Approximately 2 minutes.
I'm not so sure Mr. Maples' phone records are in evidence. I don't know if they are. I may be mistaken if they are.
I'm getting some affirmative nods. I don't know one way or the other. I'm happy to flip through the exhibit list. I'm pretty confident his number is in evidence, the last 4 digits.
They are, yes, and these are the defendant's records. After the first outgoing call we talked about, is there a second call to that number?
Yes, this series of 3 calls are all occurred to the same 2 outgoing and then 1 incoming from that same number.
And tell the jurors who might be a little farther back from the screen the times of each of those calls.
Okay, so it's 10:47, there's an outgoing call, 10:59, there's an outgoing call, and then at 11 o'clock, there's an incoming call from the same number.
And based on what you reviewed about the location of the defendant's handset when he was making those calls, do you have that Emory picture right there?
Right, so it's utilizing a tower and sector that would cover the Emory Healthcare emergency room area. And I was given this photo, so I just put it for the emergency room.
For the next few slides, I'm going to move quickly for the jurors, but for this first slide, did you also review and just kind of look generally at the activity for Diane McIver's set of records as well?
Yes, so I was just asked to show kind of the general area of where it was, that phone, what particular phone was on September 25th. So I have basically all the calls up through 3:26, I believe, and it's starting at 10:42. Kind of showing all the different towers used, but in general it's in the Eatonton area, and I've also marked where 605 P Ridge is.
And fair to say that that handset was moving around a good bit that day?
Right, so it was definitely, it went a little bit north for a few calls, 12, basically 1 to 320 or so, 326.
Okay. What about later on that Sunday evening?
So a little hard to see or pick up on, but I've put a kind of a marker over where the tower is located. That marker is much bigger than the tower, but I'm so zoomed out that I need to kind of show a little bit of emphasis. And then I put the associate marker, so there's a 1 and a 1 in this box showing there's a series of calls, 2 calls at 5:49 p.m. And then 2, there's calls at 5:52. 3, there's a call at a tower closer to 605 P Ridge at a little after 6 p.m. And then the phone travels kind of north and west, starting at 7:17 p.m. It's utilizing a tower where this number 4 is. And then the number 5 is at 8:06 p.m. and 8:17 p.m. There's 2 incoming calls utilizing that same tower that's right next to the Longhorn Steakhouse. And then I've also provided that image of the credit card receipt at 8:19.
Consistent with that same location we were talking
Yes.
about. Okay, did you do the same sort of process and review of the cell phone associated with Ms. Carter?
Yes. So starting here at 11:08, there's a series of calls, 3 calls, and then you have number 2's 5:17, number 3 is 5:49, and then utilizing that same tower, 9:21 p.m. right next to Longhorn Steakhouse. And once again, I have a copy of that credit card transaction.
Let's talk about into the 26th. Did you continue to analyze the cell phone records for the defendant and Ms. Carter?
Yes, I was asked to pull out the calls between those 2 phones on the 26th, the early morning hours. So there were a series of 5 outgoing calls from the Claude McIver phone between 12:18 and 1:17, dialing the Diane Carter phone, and I'm showing, the tower that the Claude McIver phone is close to the Emory Hospital, and then the Diane Carter phone is more over.
Sorry to interrupt. When you say Diane, are you talking about
I'm sorry, Patricia Carter.
It's okay.
Sorry, Patricia Carter, and that's When those calls are received, the towers that are utilized are more closer to downtown Atlanta.
Okay. And so the handset that's associated with Ms. Carter has some movement to it associated with being closer to downtown, is that fair?
Right, so the first call is at 1219, pretty close to, I guess that'd be the Midtown area. And then the next two calls at 116 and 117 are more closer off of 20 downtown.
In your review of the records right around this time, specifically in the defendant's records, were you able to see an outgoing call to a number associated with the Emory Police Department?
Yes, I believe that call was at like 12:39 a.m. So kind of in between these series, the 1219 and the 116 call, there's a 15-minute call to the number associated with the Emory Police Department at 12:39.
And after that call is made, are there continued attempts to call the phone associated with Ms. Carter?
Yes. Yeah, there's two more calls. Right.
Did you continue on then on the 26th, that morning, early morning hours?
Yes, so just continuing to look at the Claude McIver phone, there's two more calls, 434, 435, still in the Emory Hospital area, and then continuing on at 6:48 a.m., 1:51 p.m., and 4:37. They're more in the Buckhead area, and then there's an outgoing call at 4:07. That's also kind of in the North Buckhead, Brookhaven area.
At some point in that afternoon on the 26th, did you notice a call to a phone number associated with Detective Smith, the Atlanta Police Department?
Yes, that's the last one on here at 4:37.
And can you tell the jurors the duration of that phone call?
Is a 105-second call. So, minute 45 call, it was dialed from the Claude McIver to the Darren Smith phone.
And what about in that same block at 1:51 p.m., the phone makes an outgoing call to a number associated with who?
Rickard?
Okay. Let's talk about the 27th. Were you asked to look at any sort of time or calls on the 27th as well?
Yes, I was asked to look at the calls that were placed. 27th, that include starting at 10:40 a.m. There's a series of calls to the same number back and forth from 11:59 right at noon to 5:13 p.m. utilizing this tower and sector that's also right next to that apartment in Buckhead.
And when you say back and forth, there are incoming and outgoing calls to that number
That's correct.
associated with who?
Crane.
And is there a call that morning at 10:40 that has some duration that's longer than any of those?
Yes, it's 451 seconds call from the McIver phone.
To who?
The number associated with Hudson.
All right, what about on October 6th, where you asked to analyze any communication between the defendant's phone and a number associated with Tom Carter?
Yes, so I pulled out all the phone calls on October 6th between, like you mentioned, Claude McIver and the Carter phone. And so you can see there's a series of calls starting at 8:46 in the morning and continuing all the way through 12:51 p.m. And the phone is kind of north and south on 400.
Agent Fitzgerald, are there differences in the way two iPhones communicate with each other as opposed to two different type of phones?
They can, texting wise, there can be iMessage set up between two iPhones, any two devices with iOS.
And how does an iMessage, if it does at all, show up differently on a set of phone records than a regular text message or SMS?
So it's not a traditional text message. It's although it looks like that on your phone, it's actually a data connection that's being made. So it's typically not captured by the provider as a traditional text message. Obviously not as a phone call. It would be a data connection.
And in your review of all these records that we just went over with the jury, did you review any content of text messages or what's actually exchanged when the text is being sent?
AT&T doesn't even maintain content of everything. So we don't have content of a phone call. We don't have content of text message.
And when you order a set of records, how is it that, do you get content typically, or is it just the records of the calls?
Just the records. Most providers don't maintain content.
If you have a physical phone, are you able to get the content of messages?
Right. So there's a forensic process that can go on where there is equipment that you can connect to the phone and you can download what's on the phone if the text message is still present on the phone. Sometimes you can also get recently deleted text messages too.
And is that the only way to get the actual content that's on the phone?
With AT&T, yes.
And the cell phone records that you looked at for the defendant in this case were AT&T records?
That's correct.
After you completed this analysis and made the redactions and changes to this presentation, did that complete your involvement in this particular case?
It's my only involvement.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor. Any redirect?
Mr. Howard, any questions? If you can take a seat, please. Any questions for Agent Fitzgerald? No. Okay. Any questions from the jurors for Agent Fitzgerald? Oh, all right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Samuel, were you and Mr. Abate able to sort? Do we need to take a break or we're good to go forward? All right. Call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, the state calls Mr. Jeff Dickerson.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, sir. If you will, have a seat. Get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Jeffrey Dickerson, Jeffrey, Dickerson.
Good morning, Mr. Dickerson.
Good morning, Mr. Rucker.
And good morning, Judge. Good morning. And said that to you. Good morning, counsel. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Could you introduce yourself to the jurors, Mr. Dickerson, by restating your name and tell them, sir, how you are currently employed?
My name is Jeff Dickerson, and I am a crisis communications consultant.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what is a crisis communications consultant?
It is someone who helps people who are facing media or some sort of crisis or challenge in the court of public opinion.
Okay. And can you share with the jurors just a little bit about your educational background, your experience that allows you to perform duties for various people as a crisis communications counselor?
My background is primarily in journalism. I have been in journalism since the late 1970s at the Detroit News and spent 17 years on the editorial board of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and left there in the year 2000 to start this consultancy.
Okay. And can you guys see on that side? Okay. Get right here? Okay. And can you tell the jurors you have your own business?
That's correct.
Can you tell the jurors what is the name of your business?
Dickerson Communications.
Dickerson Communications. And your company has been in existence for how long?
18 years almost in June.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors how long have you lived here in the Atlanta area?
Since 1983.
Okay. And during that time, can you share with them, have you had the occasion to participate perhaps in a moderately famous television show that deals with aspects of politics in our community?
Yes, I've been a panelist on a public affairs show since 1987, well, up until December 2017. So I did a show, first called Sunday News Conference and then Georgia Game for about 30 years.
Okay. About 30 years?
Yes, sir.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the elected Fulton County District Attorney, Mr. Paul L. Howard Jr. And I want you to explain to the jurors, do you know Mr. Howard?
I do.
And can you describe for the jurors, when did you meet Mr. Howard and how would you describe your relationship with him?
I was a young journalist here in town in the mid-1980s. Mr. Howard was a lawyer who I think at the time was running for Solicitor General of Fulton County.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, in your interactions with Mr. Howard from that day to this day, have you ever worked for Mr. Howard on any of his campaigns or anything?
No.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors, did your relationship ever evolve to the point where you would consider him a best friend or in that circle of your best friends?
A friend, yes. Certainly not a best friend, but a friend. Yes,
Okay.
and someone that I've known for a long time and
Okay.
admired.
Okay. And you said and admired.
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors, would you have the occasion from time to time to go to lunch with Mr. Howard?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We did that early on in our relationship, friendship, in the 80s and through the 90s, and would continue to this day.
Okay. And your relationship with Mr. Howard, you have his phone number?
I do.
And you know that he has your phone number?
Yes.
And it would not be unusual from time to time you all would speak about various things?
That's correct.
Okay. Now I want to shift, and I'd like to talk to you about, more specifically, the defendant in this case, Mr. Claude Lee McIver III, and would ask you to explain to the jurors, at some point in time, did you come to become acquainted with Mr. McIver?
I did.
And when did that occur?
I was contacted by Ms. Tammy Johnson, I believe, on December 27, 2016, asking to meet with Mr. McIver.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, prior to being contacted by Ms. Tammy Johnson, did you have a personal relationship with the defendant?
I did not.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, did you actually meet with the defendant?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors, when did that occur?
It would have occurred during those final days of 2016 or in early 2017, January 2017.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, where did you meet with the defendant?
I first met with Mr. McIver at his attorney's law firm, his attorney at the time.
Okay. And do you know the attorney's name?
Stephen Maples.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as you sit here today, any recollections about the time you would have had the meeting?
Late morning.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors who was present for the meeting?
Mr. Maples, Mr. McIver.
Okay. And can you discuss with the jurors what was the topic of conversation at this meeting? And this was the first meeting, correct?
It was.
Okay. What was the topic of conversation?
Well, they were seeking a consultant to help them manage and interact with journalists and other media representatives who were covering this case.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as a result of that meeting, did you come to be engaged or employed by the defendant to assist him with crisis communications and with the media and journalists about this case?
I did.
Now, can you tell the jurors, was there a time during this meeting wherein you would have had the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with the defendant?
Yes, there was.
And can you tell the jurors what was discussed during the one-on-one conversation with the defendant?
There had been some discussion of how to get the charges dropped or reduced, and having heard his story, I suggested that we may be able to, that I might be able to help with that because I knew Mr. Howard and would be able to reach out to him. The charges at the time, I believe, were involuntary manslaughter and reckless conduct or something of that sort, and which gave me the impression that the Office of the District Attorney felt that this accident was unintentional. And having heard his story and seeing his remorse, I offered to communicate that to Mr. Howard. And he agreed he agreed to that approach and suggested that I share. Well, first of all, he said that he would offer a bonus if I was able to make that happen, and that it would be okay with him, I think were his words, if I shared that with others. And I asked for clarification because I thought that he might have some other communications team or others working on this project. And in seeking that clarification, it became clear to me that he was making reference to the district attorney.
Now, can you tell the jurors, when you say that Mr. McIver was in favor of your suggestion, what suggestion was it that you made to him?
The suggestion that I made was that we share with Mr. Howard the facts that as Mr. McIver had related them to me. And so that was the suggestion that he and I believe his attorney also agreed upon.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what were the facts that Mr. McIver shared with you?
He had never used or uttered the words Black Lives Matter in this instance, that the shooting was totally and completely accidental, that he awoke after falling asleep, presumably on Edgewood or Piedmont, to a flash of light, the sound of a gun going off.
Okay. Now, when he relayed those details to you, did you ask him any questions about any of those details that he had shared with you?
I asked him a good number of questions, I believe. I particularly felt that a lot of this case revolved around some of the early news reports. References to Black Lives Matter as the reason that he pulled out the gun or asked for the gun, and asked him if he made that statement.
You asked him that question directly?
I did.
And what did he say?
He said no.
He said no?
Yes.
Were there other questions that you asked him?
I think that there may have been other questions, either relating to events leading up to, or just seeking clarity of the events as they were as they were told to me on that in that initial meeting. Yes.
Okay. And can you share with the jurors, in your business, this crisis communication consulting that you do, is it important that you have a good relationship with the client? In this case, which would be the defendant.
It's important that the client share all of the pertinent information so that you can do your best to help them, yes.
Is it helpful to have accurate information from the client?
It's helpful for the client to be honest.
To be honest. Can you share with the jurors, how does a client's dishonesty affect the work that you're able to do?
Actually, I have relevance to this.
Well, I do believe we'll get to it at some point, but I can wait until we get there.
Okay, maybe it will become more relevant.
Yeah. Now, can you tell the jury, how is it that you came to have just a one-on-one conversation with Mr. McIver at this time?
We were at what seemed to be a commonly used conference room in a building, in an office building, and Mr. Maples left the room to return to his office for a brief period and came back, and so that's why the two of us were alone for a period of time.
Okay. And so can you tell the jurors, when you said to them earlier that when Mr. McIver made the suggestion about receiving a bonus, are bonuses in your business something that is unusual?
No.
Explain that to the jurors. What you mean?
A success fee or a bonus is either offered or often negotiated when you achieve a client's objectives.
Okay. And in this case, the objectives that were discussed with the defendant were what?
In this specific case, early on, the objective was to get the charges reduced or eliminated.
And at that time, you understood that the charges rested or vested in which law enforcement agency?
My presumption was that the charges had been filed by the district attorney's office, but I wasn't.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, did you share with the defendant the fact that you had a relationship with Mr. Howard?
I did.
Can you tell the jurors, what did you tell them?
I've known Mr. Howard for a long time. I know him to be a reasonable man, and I think that if he knew the facts as they were related to me, that he would take them under consideration.
Okay. And was it at that time that the defendant made the comment to you about the bonus and sharing it with others?
Asked and answered.
Yes.
And when you said to the jurors earlier that you were seeking clarification, what did you mean by that when he made that statement to you?
That the offer to share it with others was vague. I really didn't know who else he might have on his team who he would want me to share it with. And so I asked for clarification. When I asked for clarification, and when it became clear to me that he was talking about sharing money with the district attorney, I told him that under no uncertain terms that I would never make such an offer to the district attorney and he would never accept it.
Why did you say that to him, that you would never make such an offer? like that to the district attorney?
Because it would have been at the very least an unethical thing to do, and at most illegal, criminal.
And can you tell the jurors, how long did you have this one-on-one conversation with the defendant?
Not long, probably no more than, we were probably in the room alone for no more than 10 or 20 minutes.
Can you tell the jurors what happened next? Strike that. Let me ask you a better question. Did Mr. Maples ever re-enter the room?
He did.
And can you tell the jurors, was Mr. Maples ever made a part of this one-on-one conversation that you had with the defendant?
You mean about the offer specifically?
About the offer specifically?
No, sir. No.
Okay. So you can say to the jurors that in your presence, there was never a conversation with Steve Maples about offering a bonus to the district attorney to reduce the charges or make him go away?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, during this meeting, do you recall whether or not there was ever a conversation about whether or not the defendant had been drinking on the night of this incident?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors about that conversation?
I recall that he said that they stopped at a restaurant on their way back to Atlanta. I believe it was in Conyers. And that members of the party that he was with drank wine, but that he did not.
He did not.
That's correct.
Did he ever relate to you whether or not he had wine to drink on the car ride to the restaurant?
He did not.
Can you tell the jurors, did you have a conversation with the defendant about whether or not he was asleep at the time that the gun went off?
Yes, I believe that he said that he fell asleep after whatever danger he had perceived had subsided. I think that he said once he was sort of on Georgia State's campus.
Did you have a conversation with him that made mention of a large group of people at the time that the vehicle exited the expressway?
I don't remember whether he or not he said that there was a large group of people, only that he felt unsafe exiting where they exited.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors, did he make any statements to you about why the gun was in a plastic bag?
Either there or in a subsequent meeting, he said that he found it less likely to be stolen because it was in a plastic bag.
Now, can you tell the jurors, at the end of this first meeting, did you enter into a contractual relationship with the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. And I'd like to show you an exhibit. Let me give Mr. Sanders a chance to look at it first. Your Honor, I am marking this exhibit. It states 519. Take a look at that document. Mr. Dickerson, can you tell the jurors, do you recognize and can you identify State's Exhibit 519?
Yes.
Okay. And for the purposes of the record and for the the judge, can you just briefly tell the judge what is State's Exhibit 519?
It is a letter of agreement between myself and Mr. Mciver, referencing the legal defense team.
Okay. And does that letter of agreement, is that the written agreement between yourself and your company and the defendant?
It is.
Okay. I would tender State's 519, Judge, in evidence at this time.
Mr. Samuel?
Okay.
The waiver means no objection. All right, it's admitted.
And well, before I show it to the jurors, let me just ask you a couple of little preliminary questions. Can you tell the jurors, is the agreement signed by yourself?
It is.
And is it signed by the defendant?
It is.
And can you guys hear? Okay. Mr. Samuel, you can hear? Okay. Just lean into the microphone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what date was the agreement signed?
January 3rd, 2017.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, is each page of the agreement initialed?
The first 2 pages are initialed, yes.
Okay. And whose initials appear on the first 2 pages?
Mine and Mr. Mciver's.
Okay. Okay. It's going to come up on the screen right here. And can you tell the jurors, this typed agreement, letter of agreement, who is it that drafted it?
I did.
And on the date in which the agreement is signed, is that when you would have presented it to the defendant?
On that day or some day prior to it being actually signed and executed, yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, if you could read that first paragraph that starts with the purpose?
The purpose of this letter is to outline various communication services Dickerson Communications will provide to the public defense of Claude L. Mciver III, the legal defense team, in parentheses, and the compensation for rendering those services.
Okay. And so, as you understood this agreement, it is between you and your company, correct?
That's correct.
And the McIver, Claude McIver, for his public defense and the legal defense team.
That's correct.
Now, can you tell the jurors, does this agreement anywhere in it contemplate your representation of the legal estate for Diane McIver?
It does not.
And we're not going to read the whole document, but pretty much this first page, it kind of outlines Dickerson Communications will be responsible for the following services, correct?
Yes, sir.
And just in a nutshell, without reading the whole thing, tell the jurors, what did you understand your company would be responsible for providing to the defendant?
Essentially interacting with media concerning the media-related stories and hearings and motions related to this case.
Okay. You also go on further to outline in the execution of the plan, there are certain things that you agree that you'll do, correct?
Yes.
And generally speaking, what were the things that you agreed to do?
The things that are outlined here are preparing public statements, talking points, position papers, to advance the legal team's issues and positions, to identify proactive opportunities to build on communications efforts, provide periodic assessments of media activities, and to study and analyze external perceptions and to report back to the team.
Okay. To study external perceptions and report back to the team. What does that mean?
I think that it means essentially what it boils down to is interacting with reporters who are covering this story and ensuring that they have all of the facts that they need to have from the defense's point of view.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, did you understand that you were being hired to provide advice to the defendant and his legal defense team with respect to these communications?
Yes.
Okay. And before I go off page 1, there in the bottom right-hand corner, those are the 2 initials, correct?
Correct.
Page 2. And could you tell the jurors, this is whose signature?
Mr. McIver's.
Okay. And I see here that where the section encountered fees, compensation for services rendered under this contract will be based on an initial retainer of $7,500 and a monthly retainer of, it said $4,000 for a term of 5 months, but that is scratched through.
That's correct.
And so here, this handwritten part in the margin, what does that say with respect to the fees per month?
$3,000 a month, month to month. This agreement can be canceled with a 30-day notice to Dickerson.
Okay. And who actually wrote that in the margin? Is that your handwriting?
It is not.
Okay. And so here again we see initials, correct?
Yes.
And this is page 3. And the agreement is accepted by you when you sign it.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, did you receive payments from for your services at a rate of $3,000 per month for the work that you did?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors how many payments did you receive?
Believe that it might have been 8.
And can you tell the jurors, were you paid in cash?
No.
How did you receive payment?
Check.
And can you tell the jurors on whose account was the checks you received for payment for your services to the MacGyver defense team, on which account were those checks drawn?
I think that a couple, either 1 or 2 of the early checks was drawn on an account for Mr. McIver, and subsequent checks were drawn on an account for the estate of Diane McIver.
Can you tell the jurors, it's a good place to, I'm about to pivot.
Okay.
We have to have,
We have to break for lunch at about 12:20 sharp. I have to run a meeting, it's going to be about an hour long, so lunch break is going to be a little bit longer. So I'm loath to interrupt attorneys. Usually it's better to say, hey, finish direct, and then we can take a break. But if we don't take a break soon, we won't take a break until lunch, and that's not fair to you all. So let's take a shorter break, knowing that we have a pretty hard stop at 12:20-ish for what's going to be about an hour and 10-minute lunch break for you all, and then we'll get back in session. You all right with that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Go with Deputy Murphy, jurors into the break room. We'll talk about the case, outside research. And if this break feels a little shorter than usual, it's only because we're going to break for lunch a little bit earlier, and it'll be a longer lunch break. Thanks.
All rise for the jurors.
Mr. Rucker, anything? Well, he can step down just a second. Anything before we break?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Samuel? All right. Mr. Dickerson, we're going to be on a short break, so we'll try to get you back in here about 5 or 6 minutes to continue the testimony. Thank you.